Well, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Nature Canada on the 2 Billion Trees Initiative, Hope for Nature and the Climate. My name is Paul Babelis, and as Executive Director of Sustainability Network, it's my pleasure to welcome you all here today. Sustainability Network is a Toronto-based environmental capacity builder, and we've been helping environmentalists lead, manage, and strategize for 23 years. Today, I'll just be providing a short introduction, do some housekeeping, introduce the panelists, and then we'll get going very shortly. I want to start with a land acknowledgement and to recognize that we here in Toronto at Sustainability Network are in the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, other Anishinaabe peoples, and the Huron-Wendat. I encourage you all to take to pause where you are taking this call from and recognize that same. And if you'd like to put your acknowledgement in the chat box, that would kind of help to introduce you to everyone on the call and make those land acknowledgements all over the country. Please note that a recording of the webinar and the slides will be made available to you by end of today. And we have a little over 300 registrants, including environmental groups like EcoJustice, Nature Conservancy, World Wildlife Fund, Ducks Unlimited, Greenpeace Pembina, Suzuki Foundation, Tree Canada, numerous land trusts, a host of regional and local groups, and 13 conservation authorities based here in Ontario. The funding community is represented by Gosling Foundation, OTF, Consicon Foundation, and the Sitka Foundation. Private sector folks, Forest Products Association of Canada, and at least 2 nurseries, and various Indigenous representatives, including the Confederacy of the Mainland Mi'kmaq, Coastal First Nations, and Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation, as well as National Capital Commission, Parks Canada, and the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. So we have every province and territory except for NWT and Nunavut, and also participants from Nigeria, the United States, and Mexico. So welcome to you all. You'll be muted during the call, but we do want to get your questions. So please use the Q&A function, insert your questions there. The chat box is available for you to communicate with each other, as well as Laura from Sustainability Network team, who will be monitoring the chat box for any issues, technical or otherwise, you might be having. So now on to our session moderator, who I'll introduce, who will then in turn introduce panelists. Graham Saul is Executive Director of Nature Canada. He also served as Executive Director at Ecology Ottawa and Climate Action Network Canada, and overall has has more than 30 years of experience working on social and environmental justice issues in Canada and abroad. Over to you, Graham.
Thanks very much, Paul. I'm going to share my screen, and thanks very much to the Sustainability Initiative. So is that, Laura, have you shared the screen there? Is that what's happened? Okay. So my name is Graham Saul. I'm the Executive Director of Nature Canada. Next slide. We're going to start with a quick poll, which should pop up in your screens. We're just trying to get a better sense of who's on the call and the distribution of what kind of area you work in. So if folks want to just throw in their answers there, that would be much appreciated. Next slide. So Nature Canada, as many of you will know, is a national nature and conservation organization. We work with people and organizations across the country to discover, defend, and restore nature, including relationships with hundreds of nature groups across the country. I want to tell you a little bit about what we're going to be discussing today. First of all, no, not next slide. Can you go back, please? First of all, there is a historic opportunity right now for nature-based climate solutions. In many ways, we are at the cusp of a very exciting moment in the development of nature-based climate solutions, and I want to talk a little bit about that. We're obviously here to talk about the 2 Billion Tree Initiative, and what we know so far from that. And we're going to be just giving you a little bit of an update on how that's evolving. There was a big announcement yesterday. We're going to do a bit of a deep dive into what some of the key elements of a good urban forest management plan are, since the initiative is likely to focus on urban areas in its initial days. And then we want to talk a little bit about how we work together moving forward. You can see the results of the poll there in terms of who's on the line. I want to thank everyone for coming. So I want to emphasize that this is really the beginning of a conversation in many ways. So we can all use these opportunities in the coming days and months to figure out how we best all work together. Next slide. So winter is upon us. We know it has been a hard year for everyone, but spring is coming. There is a lot of exciting work happening right now around the 2 billion tree initiative, which is why we're here today. There are a lot of policy details left to work out. So we're not going to have answers to every question you have because it's very early days in the process. And there is a network of national environmental organizations that Nature Canada is a part of that is actively engaging the federal government on how to ensure that the program maximizes its impact on social well-being, climate mitigation and adaptation, as well as biodiversity. But the program is going to take some time to ramp up. They're going to need to grow seedlings. But the first trees we do expect to be planted in the spring, starting in urban areas, hence our focus on urban today. And for Nature Canada, there are 3 reasons why this is a truly exciting and historic moment for nature lovers and for the nature community. Next slide. So first of all, I hope it's obvious that nature lovers need action on climate change. To reverse species collapse and restore the natural world, we need the 2020s to be a breakthrough decade for action on climate change. We know that habitat destruction is the primary cause of species collapse right now, but we also know that if we fail to address climate change, if we allow runaway climate change to occur, it's going to make our efforts to reverse wildlife decline and to protect nature almost impossible. So it's critical that the 2020s be a key moment for climate change action. Next slide. Secondly, the climate change movement needs nature lovers. We're already part of the climate change movement, but we need to step up in new ways, because without the help of the nature community, the climate change movement will struggle to create the groundswell of action that we need to address the climate crisis. Next slide. And this is for a lot of reasons. First of all, I would argue the nature community is the largest arm of the broader environmental movement. No matter what size of community you go into, you will find the land trusts, the naturalists, the birders, the botanists, the wildlife centers, the trail associations, the canoe and the kayak clubs. We represent an ecosystem that is deeply embedded in communities across the country, and we have intimate knowledge of our landscapes, and we're already doing a lot of the work associated with nature-based climate solutions. Secondly, we're engaging millions of Canadians already that are not primarily motivated by the obvious need to phase out fossil fuels and ramp up low-impact renewable energy. And nothing I say today is in any way intended to take away from the absolute necessity, and in many ways, the most important dimension of the fight against climate change is definitely our need to phase out fossil fuels and ramp up low-impact renewable energy. But we talk to Canadians that are not primarily motivated by that in many cases, and we can bring them in to climate change solutions. Finally, if we throw our support behind the climate change movement, we can also play a critical role in creating public demand that we all need to get the job done. Next slide. So the nature community right now has a historic opportunity to be part of the climate change solution, and by doing so to also advance our biodiversity goals. For the first time in history in Canada, nature-based climate solutions are a core component of Canada's commitment to fight climate change. Next slide. I want you to take a second to look at this graph or this image. This image is actually from the updated climate change strategy that the federal government released last week, which clearly indicates, the strategy as a whole clearly indicates that that nature-based climate solutions are now a core component of the strategy. We're going to need to approach climate change and climate solutions from a wide variety of perspectives, but climate change is now clearly on the agenda. And I want you to look at the bottom here in terms of the root structure. You've got the Planting 2 Billion Trees initiative, and the federal government just announced $3.1 billion in funding for the 2 Billion Tree initiative. You've got protecting lands and waters. The federal government has announced a goal of protecting 25% of Canada's land and water and ocean by 2025 and is well on course to commit to 30% by 2030. This is a truly historic commitment that has major implications for biodiversity and nature's capacity to store and sequester carbon. Establishing Indigenous protected areas. One of the most exciting things about the moment we're in terms of nature protection is that we have an opportunity to simultaneously advance our goals about reconciliation and support conservation at the same time. And Indigenous-led conservation is in many ways the most exciting thing happening in the nature conservation world right now. And we need to learn from and support Indigenous communities across the country. Conserving and restoring ecosystems. Hundreds of millions of dollars of additional resources were announced during the fiscal update beyond the $3.1 billion to support other efforts related to conserving and restoring grasslands, wetlands, peatlands, etc. And it's going to be really interesting and exciting to see how that emerges within the context of the climate change plan. And I would add embracing natural solutions. I did actually edit the image and add that. Whereas there's a rethink occurring in terms of our approach to infrastructure, and natural infrastructure is increasingly being recognized. So from these foundations, these roots flow a wide variety of different kinds of outcomes, including, as you can see along the top, the notion of capturing and storing CO2 and reducing impacts related to extreme weather from climate change. So this is the first time that the nature community or the nature issues have ever been this clearly embedded and this well funded within the context of Canada's broad climate change plan. Next slide. So we need to seize the day as nature organizations and as nature communities. If nature groups come together around nature-based climate solutions, then we can accelerate progress in addressing the twin crises of mass extinction and climate change simultaneously, because we are best placed to make the most of the emerging opportunities and funding. We know the land, we're already doing many of this work, and because nature lovers can inject critical new energy into the climate change movement. Next step, next slide. So we're here today in part to talk a little bit about the 2 Billion Tree Initiative. We're here to talk about how we can work together moving forward, but we also are here to call on nature groups across the country to dive into the concepts and ideas around nature-based climate solutions, to take action to implement nature-based solutions, including the 2 Billion Tree Initiative at the local level. And I think there's an opportunity now to say that every jurisdiction in the country that has a climate change strategy, whether it's a municipality, a county, a province, every jurisdiction in the country that has a climate change strategy now needs to be asked the question, what is your nature-based climate solutions component to that strategy? But today we're going to focus on trees. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Erin to talk a little bit about some of the things we know so far about the 2 Billion Tree Initiative.
Thanks, Graham. And I'd just like to introduce myself. My name is Erin Willingham. I am a nature network organizer with Nature Canada, and I'm just going to share a little bit about what we've heard so far about the 2 Billion Tree commitment. In early November, Natural Resources Canada hosted a series of information sessions. And so this is some information that we learned during those information sessions, as well as from that major announcement yesterday from Minister Reagan. Okay, so we know that these 2 billion trees, which is a huge number of trees, these are going to be net additional to the 600 million trees that the logging industry plants each year. It was announced yesterday that the 2 billion trees is projected to reduce greenhouse gases emissions by up to 12 megatons by 2050. And as Graham already mentioned, we're expecting the planting to start in spring of 2021 And that planting has been announced that it's going to be focused in urban areas. So besides urban areas, they'll be planting down in community forests. The government also has made a strong commitment to doing planting in partnership with Indigenous communities, as well as on Crown and private lands. And it is expected that the majority of planting will be done on Crown lands. And lastly here, it's been announced that these costs will be shared. So there's $3.1 billion going towards this program, and the government is very much looking for partnerships to work with other organizations, different levels of government, in order to inject and bring some more money into this program. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we heard, there was a lot that we've heard, and partnerships are very important for the government. And yesterday in Minister O'Regan's announcement, he made an emphasis that this program and its enormity will take careful planning amongst the different partnerships. So that includes the different Indigenous communities, the different levels of government, the NGO sector, the forestry industry, farmers. As well, announced yesterday is that there's going to be an advisory committee created. And this was in the suggestion that came out of the information sessions back in November with Natural Resources Canada. So it was great to hear taking some of the feedback that Natural Resources Canada had heard. Next slide, please. So as we mentioned, there's an urban, a non-urban dimension, but we're going to focus a little bit more today on that urban dimension. Next slide, please. And I'm going to pass it off now to my colleague, Vilbert Vabi, who's going to talk a little bit more about the urban forest management plans.
Thank you very much, Erin. My name is Vilbert Vabi, and I'm the Policy and Campaigns Manager, Reforestation with Nature Canada. So I'm going to be talking about urban forest management plans, what constitutes a good urban forest management plan. But before we dive into that, we would like to find out, next slide, please. If your jurisdiction, do you know if your jurisdiction has a forest management plan? Next slide, please. So there are several definitions that have been advanced as to what constitutes an urban forest management. What do we consider urban forest management? And the phrase is usually used interchangeably with urban forestry, which is a specialized branch of forestry with the objective of cultivating and managing trees for physiological, sociological, and economic well-being. So the whole concept of urban forestry is to foster economic development and promote the development of healthy urban forest. Next slide, please. So why are we talking about urban trees? Urban trees have a multitude of benefits, and urban trees, their benefits could be categorized into social, economic, and environmental components. Socially, urban forests promote mental well-being and reduce stress levels. Environmentally, urban forests decrease the urban heat island effect and reduce temperatures in cities, thereby helping cities adapt to climate change. And economically, urban trees increase property values. Next slide, please. How have Canadian forests changed over time? Over 80% of Canadians live in urban cities. So there's generally a tendency to continuously build in urban areas to accommodate for the increasing urbanization effect. So that's the city of Calgary there, and you can see how much of it's a manufactured environment with few trees. And the effect of this is that over the years, we beginning to have decreased forest cover and loss of species. And Eric Davis actually applied this to Toronto's urban forest and found that compared to 100 years ago, there's much less diversity, and there's been a significant decrease in tree loss. Now, next slide, please. This is also compounded by the effects of climate change. Previous models have revealed that if we have a 1.5 degrees increase in average temperatures, then about 8% of global habitat will be lost. We have about 14% of global population that will be exposed to extreme heat. And though these are global models, it's indicative of the dangerous effects of climate change. Canada's climate change report last year revealed that compared to 70 years ago, there's been an average of a 1.7 degree increase in average temperatures across Canada. So this is dramatic in the sense that we may have more Canadians that are exposed to extreme heat events. We may be losing more than 8% of habitats. So the potential impacts of climate change on Canada could be very, very catastrophic. Next slide, please. So what's the potential of the 2 billion trees in mitigating the effects of climate change? So basically trees sequester carbon through the process of biosynthesis or photosynthesis, which is the process of biomass production. And in order for the 2 billion trees to have a significant effect, to have a significant mitigating effect on climate change, this must go hand in hand with the significant decrease in fossil fuel use. So how much we must significantly reduce how much carbon dioxide is being emitted into the atmosphere. Next slide, please. So a review of the literature identifies a number of key themes that we think are imperative for as to what constitutes a good urban forest management plan. It's important to point out here that this is not an exhaustive list of themes, nor does the sequence in which we present this, we're not presenting this in any order of importance. So it's just what we think should be found in a good urban forest management plan. And like, as I mentioned, if the objective is to start a conversation, so we're hoping that together we could continue to identify what themes constitute a good urban forest management plan and advocate for those. Next slide, please. So what's the importance of planting and maintaining healthy trees? Planting and maintaining healthy trees is important in that it directly increases canopy cover. So canopy cover is the percentage of leaf cover per unit urban area, and it's important in that it intercepts rainwater and releases water vapor into the atmosphere, which cools surrounding areas, thereby mitigating the urban heat island effect. So next slide, please. So municipalities need to make an explicit commitment to increase canopy cover. And it's often ideal when they have a numerical target, because that way it's easier to track progress and identify priority or targeted areas for planting. And the city of Kamloops is an example of a city that has identified where tree planting can be done. So it's mapped out how much canopy cover needs to be increased in each neighborhood and what species of trees need to be planted. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the importance of ensuring tree diversity. Next slide, please. So tree diversity is crucial to urban forests in that diverse urban forests provide habitat to a wide range of organisms. Diverse forests increase the resilience of urban forests to pests and diseases. And in cases where native species are well represented, it contributes to the protection of regional ecosystems. So there's an ongoing debate on whether or not canopy cover should be increased with native or non-native species. And I believe, as a social scientist, the answer to that question is it depends, because cities are manufactured spaces, so it's not often possible to increase canopy cover with native tree species, even when we want to. So an example is the city of Winnipeg. The city of Winnipeg has a tree planting resource that it identifies which species of trees can be planted in different parts of the city. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the importance of nature conservation and biodiversity. Next slide, please. So as mentioned earlier, healthy forests are diverse and provide habitat for for other organisms. So ensuring diversity helps build resilience to climate and pests. So a variety of tree environments connecting functional natural areas can serve as wildlife corridor for several species. And the city of Victoria has made a commitment to increase forest patches across the city, thereby increasing connectivity across the city. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the importance of equity and diversity. Next slide, please. So increasing access to green space for everyone in the city, irrespective of their socioeconomic status, is important, is that as it directly impacts mental health and stress levels of residents in urban areas. So there needs to be an explicit commitment from cities to increase access to green spaces for everyone that lives in an urban area. And the city of Halifax has made such a commitment. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the importance of ensuring citizen education and engagement. Next slide. So closely related to improving access to green spaces for all communities in urban areas is the importance of also understanding how different communities utilize and value green spaces. It's also important for the city to explain to its citizens what's the rationale for them to engage in an urban forest and how can they be involved. So without this, it's difficult for communities that do not value trees to care for trees, even if it's in their backyard. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the importance of having an inventory of trees in urban areas. Next slide, please. So the foundation of effective urban forest management is a detailed tree inventory. So a detailed tree inventory provides information about tree health, tree species, size, location, and hazardous trees. Based on this, from strategic planning, for example, the development of maintenance and management plans. A recent study of 42 Canadian cities found that 25% of these cities had no tree inventories and 64% of them had no assessment of their canopy cover. So in such a situation, it becomes extremely difficult, if not impossible, for these cities to develop effective forest management plans. And the city of Charlottetown has done an excellent job of categorizing and putting this in a database of all the tree health of all the trees that exist in the city, what tree species exist where, what's their size, what's their location, and based on this, they're developing management plans. Other important themes that, because of time, we cannot talk about today is the importance of tree protection bylaws. So what's the city doing to make sure that trees are protected? So at this point, I'm going to pass it back to Eric.
Thanks, Philbert. Okay, so for the last 5 or so minutes of the presentation, we're just going to share a little bit about what we're doing and then share some ideas of how we can work together moving forward. So right now, and for the last few months, since this announcement was made about the 2 billion tree initiative, Nature Canada has been lobbying federal decision makers with other conservation organizations across the country in an effort to ensure that this program plants the right trees for the right reasons in the right places. And we find that those 3 R's really sum up how tree planting efforts should take place regardless of your jurisdiction, regardless of your context and your climate. And yesterday in the announcement from Minister O'Regan, we were very happy to see that language repeated about the right trees in the right places. And so it's important to keep lobbying and keep applying that pressure to make sure that we're also doing it for the right reasons. Next, we have been workshopping with organizations to understand their needs. And so similar to the presentation that we're doing today, we've been doing it on one-on-one with nature groups, with climate organizations, to share the information that we've learned about the 2 billion tree program, to start raising some questions and start thinking about how we can get involved and how we can work together so that as more information is announced, that we're able to act on it quickly. And so I'll share a little bit later about how we can hopefully organize some workshops with your organization and myself. And lastly, Nature, here us at Nature Canada, we have been developing a toolkit and a map on nature-based climate solutions. And so our objective with this toolkit and map is to showcase and highlight existing nature-based climate solution projects that are happening throughout the country, as well as pull together the existing resources that exist, existing resources that are already developed, so that could help organizations and municipalities who want to implement these type of projects. So if you have any knowledge, so if you know of any existing projects or if you have any existing resources, I would love to hear from you, and we'd love to share those. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we have started thinking about, because this program is still evolving, and we know there's 2 billion trees that need to be planted, and we know there's going to be a strong urban component to this, but it's not exactly clear, or we're not sure yet of which organizations will be leading those efforts. So what we want you and your organization to start thinking about is what opportunities could this program create that could help you plant trees in your own community? And that is a question we would love to discuss with you. And next, another way to start thinking about this program and start thinking about your involvement is to start thinking how best to engage your decision makers so your jurisdiction will benefit from these 2 billion tree initiative. There's a lot of resources that's going to be available. We did talk about that they're going to need to be cost shared, and we do know that they're looking for partners to help share those costs. But essentially, this is going to be an important time to start engaging your decision makers and seeing if they are interested in these in the 2 billion tree program. If they are, that's excellent. How can we support them to increase their ambition? And alternatively, perhaps they haven't started thinking about getting involved and planting some of those trees in their community. And again, another great opportunity to start having these conversations with them and starting a campaign to ensure that your municipality, your county is involved. Next slide, please. Okay, so there was, I alluded to the fact that we are already giving workshops. And if this is something that, if some of these questions we've been raising so far is something you're interested in and you want to pursue, we would love to co-host a workshop with you and your organization. And that could, if you know of any other organizations in your community that we could bring into that conversation, that'd be excellent. But essentially, we just want to start thinking about how this 2 billion tree commitment can look in our region. Next slide, please. And yeah, we want to keep in touch. We want to keep sharing information with you. We want to keep thinking about how we can get involved, how we can work together. We see this as a huge opportunity to increase tree canopy cover in municipalities and counties across the country for the myriad of benefits that trees planted, as both Vilbert and Graham has discussed today. And so we believe that all the jurisdictions should really be trying to get involved in this program, and we would love to work with you to help your organization do that. So I'm just going to pass it back to Graham now. Oh, and yeah. So in order to keep this conversation going, I'm going to put a chat or a link in the chat, and that is going to bring you to a form. If you want to share your contact information, I'd love to get in touch with you. Alternatively, I will also include my email address in the chat box, and we will be following up this presentation with an email that includes some more additional details and information that we have been compiling in the last couple weeks. So stay tuned for that in your inboxes, and I'm going to turn it back to Graham now. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin and Vilbert. I think you can stop the screen sharing now, Laura. Yeah, so before we move on to Q&A, there's a lot of good questions there. There's 20 questions. I want to reiterate some of the core ideas that we've discussed here. One is that this is a really historic moment for nature-based climate solutions in Canada. Nature organizations have an opportunity to take advantage of resources and be part of the solution to climate change in new ways, and that's only going to increase over in the coming years. With regard to the 2 billion tree initiative, these are early days. We did see in the fiscal update $3.1 billion, I think $3.16 billion put aside for the 2 billion tree initiative. That's a significant investment from the federal government, and they'll be looking to leverage that through partnerships. And so that was a breakthrough in the fiscal update when they did that, when they actually identified the resources within the budget. It was also a breakthrough last week when the federal government got up and announced its new climate plan and made nature-based climate solutions a clear core pillar within that, and reiterated the importance of the 2 billion tree initiative. And it was also a breakthrough yesterday when Minister O'Regan got up and made the announcement, the 2 billion tree initiative, in terms of the official launch. And I would encourage you to track down, and we'll include this in the email that we send out. I'd encourage you to watch his announcement. It's only about 10 minutes. You can find it on his Facebook page, but it clearly shows two things. It clearly shows that the government is interested in having a conversation about how this can maximize social well-being while also delivering clear results for biodiversity and climate change. And it's also clear that the government has been listening to some of the criticisms that some of the national organizations have been raising, or I wouldn't say criticisms, I would say concerns, as the process is beginning to take shape. We do want to make sure that this is an initiative that grows new forests. And Minister O'Regan clearly said yesterday in his presentation that we're building forests and we're building canopies. This is an initiative that if all is done well, will reforest or afforest or will increase forest cover by an area twice the size of the province of Prince Edward Islands. So it's a big area that we're talking about here. And he also mentioned permanence. And one of the things we've been trying to ensure is that these were not trees that were essentially just going to enter the cycle of the logging industry. But we were looking at long-term increase in tree cover across Canada. So I think there's real reason to take the government in good faith right now in terms of the direction this program is headed. And for all of us to come together and really make sure that the right trees are planted in the right places for the right reasons, and to continue to build or to start building a groundswell of activities at the local level so that we're demonstrating that there's demand for this kind of support from the federal government. We need to not only engage the federal government directly in making sure that this program is as focused on biodiversity and climate change impacts as possible, while also emphasizing reconciliation and social outcomes, but we also now have to build the demand at the local level by taking leadership ourselves, by engaging our municipal and county and provincial governments, and by making this a success story by driving demand at the local level. So I'm going to turn to some questions now. There are a lot of good questions here. I'll go through them, and I'll invite Wilbert and Aaron to jump in if they have any additional things that they want to add. But Mike Sullivan starts us off and says, if planting started on October 19, 2019, the day of the election, it required that 14 trees be planted every second of daylight, non-frozen hours, to plant 2 billion trees by 2030. 205 million should have been planted by now. How will this happen? Where will it happen? Who will plant the trees? Who will monitor the trees? So there's a lot there. I think it's important to note that the logging industry currently plants about 600 million trees a year in Canada. So 2 billion trees is a lot of trees, but Canada can plant 2 billion trees over the next 10 years. We don't have to worry about whether or not we've got the expertise and the capacity to make this happen. We just have to find the right trees in the right places for the right reasons and focus on successful delivery of the project. In fact, we can go more than 2 billion if we set our minds to it. So I'm not worried about whether or not we have the capacity to plant 2 billion trees. It's going to be a challenge, but we're up for the challenge, and that's part of the fun, right? Who will plant the trees? I think we've heard from Aaron that the answer is there's going to be a diversity of partners. There's going to be the forestry industry, there's going to be community groups, there's going to be municipalities, there's going to hopefully be as many Indigenous communities as possible. And there will be private sector actors, and so hopefully the government will be taking the approach that says that they will be trying to work with as many different kinds of stakeholders. I think private lot owners and will also be a critical constituency that needs to be worked with. We really also want to make sure that as many of these trees as possible are planted in southern landscapes so that they play a role in helping restore degraded forest ecosystems. And that's going to involve working with a lot of private landowners. Because there just isn't as much public land in areas of the South. And who will monitor the trees? I think the monitoring mechanism is actually a conversation that is in process. I think that we all need to play a role in monitoring them. I'm hoping that as specifically in the urban or county dimension, that governments that want to show leadership around this will be playing a fair amount, an active role in helping monitor the trees. I'm hoping the federal government will have clear monitoring mechanisms established. But these are relatively early days, and that's a good example of the kind of thing that we need to stay on top of. Vilbert or Aaron, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I would just add that yesterday in Minister O'Regan's announcement, they gave out a timeline, and it talks about the 10 years, but something that I found new that we hadn't heard before in any other previous announcement is that the urban component, tree planting in urban communities, is expected to go over a 15-year period. And so that's something I'll be paying attention to and seeing what else they have to say about that. And that timeline and Facebook recording of Mr. O'Regan's announcement, we will include those in the follow-up email that we sent.
And there are going to be, trees that are going to be planted in the tens in local parks by local organizations, or in the hundreds in local parks, and those trees are going to be opportunities for us to engage the general public about this initiative at large. But a lot of the trees are obviously going to be planted in the thousands and the tens of thousands in relatively rural landscapes. And so we need to make sure that we're approaching this from as many different directions as possible. Secondly, Shelley asked the question, could 12 megatons be explained in a way I might understand regarding quantity? So this is an interesting question, and I'm not sure I have a clear answer to this. There's a couple things I think we do need to accept right at the beginning of this. When we talk about nature-based climate solutions, we need to understand that nature plays a critical role in the solution to climate change, but it is in no way, shape, or form a substitute for the fundamental need to phase out the burning of oil, coal, and gas and ramp up low-impact renewable energy. That energy transition absolutely must occur and will play the largest role in addressing climate change. 12 megatons occurs within the context of a national inventory of 700 or 800 megatons a year that is being produced by Canada. So we also need to be modest in terms of understanding that planting these trees is not the solution to climate change. I always think of it as there is a quiver of arrows that has 15, 20, 30 arrows in it. And this is just one of those. And if you look at what the federal government is thinking in terms of between now and 2030, once again, going back to the report that it released last week, you'll find that it does kind of enumerate what percentage of greenhouse gas emissions they're likely to achieve based on different kinds of activities. And so buildings and oil and gas and electricity and heavy industry and transportation and waste and agriculture and land. And land is only one component of this, but land changes, and the 2 Billion Trees Initiative would be one dimension of that. It is on the same scale as greenhouse gas emission reductions from waste and other kinds of waste related management questions. It's on a similar scale as transportation. It's not a lot far behind heavy industry and electricity. I guess it's about half as much. And so on the one hand, we have to be honest about the fact that 12 megatons is not what is going to make or break Canada's capacity to do the right thing on climate change. On the other hand, we need every dimension that we can get. And this will not only deliver greenhouse gas emission reductions, but it will also deliver very important biodiversity outcomes, and will play a role in social well-being, creating some 4,000 to 5,000 jobs, as well as hopefully advancing our reconciliation objectives as a country and our desire to support and honor Indigenous-led conservation. Wilbert or Aaron, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think you did a good job, Graham, explaining how the bigger picture, explaining the bigger picture and the contribution of the 12 megatons.
So we have another question, which is, are you aware if Ontario's conservation authorities have been involved as a potential partner? I do not know. Wilbert and Aaron participated in all 5 of the information sessions. Wilbert, Aaron, do you remember Ontario's conservation authority specifically being mentioned at any stage?
Not particularly. There were over 100 attendees at each of the information sessions. But I have participated in a presentation given by an Ontario Conservation Authority, and it sounded like they were aware of the program and they were speaking with the provincial lead. So it seems like perhaps the government's going to provinces to reach as many different partners as possible, because something we did hear from Natural Resources Canada is that it won't be feasible for them to have one-on-one relationships. And so perhaps they're looking for more of a hierarchical approach, or train the trainer kind of thing. So that's just a best guess without having spoken with the Ontario Conservation Authorities myself.
But I also know from the Ottawa experience that the conservation authorities in the Ottawa area are some of the most active tree planters. And so I would assume that they'll be a very important constituency as this rolls out in Ontario. Wilbert, sorry, did I interrupt you?
No, I was going to add that, so I know that some of the conservation authorities work hand in hand with Forest Ontario. So, and I know for sure that Forest Ontario was on that call, on some of the calls, information sharing calls. So I think if Forest Ontario is involved and they are closely working with conservation authorities, I think we could assume that to some extent conservation authorities are in the loop.
Yeah, good point. And Forest Ontario is showing a fair amount of leadership throughout this process in its various manifestations. So Kate Hayes asked the question, in many urban areas, there's limited space even on public lands. What measures are being taken to engage the private sector, including corporations, to use their lands? If private lands are used, what measures are in place to ensure longer-term protection of trees? So I think your question about what measures are in place to ensure longer-term protection of these trees when they are planted on private lands or by private actors is a very good question. And it is one that the national NGOs that have been involved in debating how best to advise the federal government as it moves forward have discussed at some length. And it's not entirely clear exactly what the answer to that is. On the one hand, we very much want these trees to be seen as being permanent contributions to Canada's overall forested areas. And we are pushing to ensure that to the greatest degree possible that happens. On the other hand, we've also acknowledged that a critical dimension, and you point out the notion that there is limited land, and if we are going to be engaging, if we're going to be emphasizing the potential for these trees to make a difference in southern landscapes, we also have to acknowledge that there is limited public land in southern landscapes. And so there's an open question as to how we best ensure that when we work with woodlot associations and private landowners who have woodlots or who are open to planting on private land, what can we do to ensure the greatest degree of permanence as possible? Without being able to necessarily assume that we can tie up a private landowner in, for hundreds of years and indefinitely. So that is an open question, and I would encourage everyone to continue to ask that question. How do we ensure that there is a degree of permanence while also delivering on the goals of the project and trusting the goodwill of many private landowners that they're interested in doing the best things with their land and making a contribution themselves. Wilbert, Aaron, anything to add to that?
So I was just going to add that in addition to the permanence issue, the incentives for private landowners to have trees on their lands vary a lot. It varies a lot, and whether or not people want to plant trees on their land depend on those incentives. So a question that I don't have an answer to is how do we incentivize private landowners to have trees on their land is one that needs to be examined also.
And to ensure that those trees are there for as long as possible. Yeah. There's another question here. How are NGOs, there's another question. Will groups be able to get money directly, not through a municipality or conservation authority? This is the kinds of details that are still being worked out. So we can't answer that because we're looking to NRCan and Environment and Climate Change Canada to come forward with additional details on how the program is going to be rolled out. I think Aaron's point was a good one, and one that to some degree we have to show some appreciation for when it comes to the federal government. The federal government may be looking for opportunities to work with local groups, but through other entities, right? So it may or may not be the case that if you're Nature Guelph, it'll be easy for you to directly access resources related to this program. You may want to partner with the municipality. You may want to partner with Tree Canada, who may be creating opportunities to, monetize the volunteer time that local groups are putting into it as a matching contribution and using some resources that they've been able to get from the federal government to directly support local groups to do tree planting. So on the one hand, I think we'll be encouraging the federal government to really support and empower local nature groups that are so well placed to engage their constituency. I sometimes say that it may only be 5 or 10% of trees that are planted in urban areas, but it's going to get 95% of the attention for this project. And so if the federal government is thinking clearly, it's thinking about how can we best support and engage local groups so that tree planting that occurs in urban areas is being done by organizations and constituencies that have a public and a supporter base that cares about these issues so that this good work can be widely known and appreciated. But it may be that many of the opportunities for local nature groups to access this will be through other third parties that the government will be working with. And in terms of how are NGOs partnering with NRCan on this initiative, which is another question, it really is, right now, there's a bit of a dialogue going on between NGOs and the federal government about how we want to make sure that the initiative is designed in such a way that we can maximize the climate and biodiversity outcomes associated with this work. That is happening largely in an informal capacity in terms of our day-to-day engagement with the federal government, though we have been invited into the information sessions that were mentioned earlier on. I think there are different NGOs that are further along in terms of specific conversations with NRCan about how their existing model of project delivery can be used as a way to ensure program delivery. And that is in many ways happening on a one-on-one basis. And so as of now, there is no formal one-dimensional answer to that question. If you're a local organization that primarily focuses on a local jurisdiction, I would really encourage you to start this conversation, as Aaron pointed out earlier, with your local jurisdiction. You know, are they aware that this is on the horizon? What are they doing to ensure that they can take advantage of this? And so I think that these are open questions that people need to be organizing around. And as Aaron said, we are very interested in staying in touch with you. Whether you are an NGO or a local business or a private landowner or an Indigenous community, we're going to be setting up mechanisms to try to provide updates and information on how this project is evolving. And we are interested in sitting down with you and other groups in your constituency and having a conversation about how we can move this forward together. So please do stay in touch. We'll be sending a follow-up email. Erin has put her note. I mean, has put the why don't you put it again in there? Opportunity to sign up. And I know there's a lot of other good questions here from local constituents, from local groups like the chairman of the Glanbrook Conservation Committee. Really good questions about how we're going to be measuring and about how urban soils and how trees can, you know, the right trees in the right places for the right reasons, and how we take into consideration our changing climate and the way in which many urban trees starve and struggle to survive. So I know there's a lot of other good questions here. And we would be happy to continue this conversation. In fact, we are actively interested in continuing this conversation. And so we look forward to doing that. And we want to thank you as well, because we know that you folks, the people, the 150, 160 groups that joined this and the 300 that signed up for it are already blazing these trails at a local level and have been for a long time. And we may have new opportunities, but we ultimately need to rely on the skills and capacity of the existing nature community to help move this forward. I don't know, Vilbert or Aaron, do you have anything to add to that before we turn it back to Paul and our friends at the Sustainability Network who've been so kind in facilitating this workshop for us?
No, I just want to thank the participants for their time and for giving us the opportunity to talk about some of the work that we do at Nature Canada. And please send us an email and we'll be in touch. Thank you very much also to the Sustainability Network for giving us this opportunity.
Yeah, well said, Vilbert. And we're excited about this. We know there's still work that needs to be done around the 2 Billion Tree Program, and we are definitely doing that work. And we want to see trees planted in every jurisdiction. And so if that is something that interests you, please, yeah, we would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Well, great. And also that we will be sharing the Zoom archive, both the Q&A function and the chat box. So if you have any parting comments or words of advice to Nature Canada, please put them in the chat box and they will get that information. So just on behalf of everyone out there, thanks Aaron, Graham, and Vilbert for the presentations. I'll mention again that you'll all be getting the slides and a link to the recording later today. I encourage you all to check out other things we have coming up, including a session this Thursday with fundraising trainer extraordinaire Ken Wyman on Where's the Money At, as well as fundraising sessions on grants and individual donors in January and February. When we close this window momentarily, there'll be a feedback form. So please take that to heart and share your thoughts on how today went. We'll share that with all the panelists as well. And apart from that, thanks very, very much for coming, and stay safe. And have a great as you can holiday. Thanks again for coming. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.